Ryan Brooks seized Emma's wrist and twisted hard until she cried out. "Sign the papers," he said, pressing her against the brick wall outside her own workshop, his forearm across her throat. "Your grandfather built this place. Don't make me burn it down around you." She felt her knee buckle when he shoved her onto the pavement. He crouched down, grabbed her chin, forced her to look at him. "You have 48 hours. Then he stood, smoothed his jacket, and walked away like nothing happened. Like she was nothing. Like she had always been nothing. And Emma Carter lay on the wet pavement outside the place her grandfather had built with his bare hands and made a decision. If you're new here, please subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Emma was 45 minutes late, and she knew it with every painful step she took toward the elevator. The lobby of the Moretti Group's headquarters was the kind of place designed to make you feel small. Marble floors, ceilings so high you couldn't see where they ended. Men in dark suits standing near walls like they had been carved into the architecture. Every surface was polished to the point where you could see your own reflection, and Emma was very aware of what her reflection looked like right now. Her hair was coming out of the clip she had put in that morning. There was a faint smear of something grease maybe, or dust from the sidewalk along the left side of her jacket. She had changed in the back of a cab because there had been no time to go home, and the blouse she had grabbed was slightly wrinkled across the front. Her bag was hanging from one shoulder, overloaded with fabric samples and a portfolio she had been adding to for 6 months, and her left leg was on fire. Not burning the way a pulled muscle burns after a workout. Burning the way a bruise burns when the damage underneath the skin is still deciding how bad it wants to get. She didn't look at the security desk when she reached it. She kept her chin up and her voice level and said her name and the name of the person she was there to see, and she signed her name on the visitor log, and she accepted the badge. The young man handed her with a steady hand because her hands were one of the things she still had control over. 45th floor, the young man said, and his eyes dropped to her leg for just a half second. She pretended not to notice. The elevator ride took 47 seconds. She counted them. It was something she had started doing in high school during panic attacks, counting small things, controllable things to give her brain somewhere to go when it wanted to fly apart in all directions. 47 seconds. The doors opened onto a hallway that was quieter than anything she had experienced in a public building. The carpet muffled everything. There were no harsh lights, just a long corridor with a single set of double doors at the end. A woman in a charcoal blazer was already walking toward her. "Miss Carter?" Not a question, a statement, borderline accusation. "Yes, I know I'm late. I'm so sorry. There was a situation outside my workshop this morning, and Mr. Moretti has been waiting since 9 o'clock. The woman's voice was not unkind. It was simply factual, the way a calculator is factual. "He has another appointment at 11:30. "I understand. I completely understand. If he's willing to still see me, I'll take whatever time he has left. 10 minutes. 5. I need the chance to show him what we're doing." The woman looked at her for a moment, not unkindly, just thoroughly. "Wait here," she said, and she turned and went through the double doors. Emma stood in the hallway and breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. She had practiced this pitch 43 times. She had practiced it in the shower. She had practiced it driving to suppliers. She had practiced it lying in bed at 2 in the morning when the weight of the debt and the bills and the constant pressure had made sleep feel like something that happened to other people. She knew this pitch the way she knew her own name. She could deliver this pitch half asleep, half sick, half destroyed. She had been doing it in some version or another every day for the last 3 years. The door opened. "He'll see you," the woman said. Emma Carter straightened her spine, shifted the weight off her left leg, and walked through. Dominic Moretti was standing at the window when she entered. That was the first thing she noticed. Not his desk, which was large and dark and absolutely clear of clutter. Not the city sprawling out 45 floors below. Not the 2 other men in the room, one seated near the window, one standing near the door, who both turned to look at her when she entered. She noticed that he was standing at the window with his hands clasped behind his back, and he did not turn around immediately, and the silence in the room was the kind of silence that people use deliberately, that people have learned to use deliberately because they have discovered that silence is one of the most effective tools of power that exists. She had met men like this before. Men who built the architecture of a room around their own authority. Men who had learned that making people wait, making people stand in silence, making people feel like they were already slightly behind before the conversation even started, it was all part of the design. She was not going to let it work on her. Not today. Mr. Moretti, she said, I'm Emma Carter. I'm the owner of Carter Woodcraft on Ashbury Street. And I am so sorry for being late, genuinely. I know that your time is valuable, and I know that keeping you waiting was unprofessional, and I am not going to make excuses. I'm just going to ask you to let me show you what I brought, and I promise you, whatever time you give me, I will not waste a single second of it. He turned around. She had seen photographs of Dominic Moretti. Everyone in Boston had at some point or another. His face appeared in business sections and occasionally in the kind of news articles that danced carefully around specifics without committing to details. 42 years old, born in the North End, built an empire in commercial real estate, private investment, and a constellation of other ventures that were described in language so deliberately vague, it had clearly been crafted by lawyers. In person, he was different, not larger, not more intimidating, just more real. There was a quality to his presence that photographs couldn't capture. Something in the way he occupied space, as if the room had been built to accommodate him rather than the other way around. He looked at her, not the way the security guard had looked at her, not the way the woman in the charcoal blazer had looked at her, not the politely detached, professionally neutral look she had been getting all morning from everyone who noticed she wasn't quite right. He looked at her the way someone looks at a problem they are genuinely trying to understand. Sit down, he said. His voice was quieter than she expected. Controlled, precise. I'm fine standing honestly, Miss Carter. A pause. Sit down. She sat, and the moment she shifted her weight and lowered herself into the chair across from his desk, she exhaled just slightly, just barely in a way she hadn't planned and couldn't stop. Because the chair took the weight off her leg, and the relief was immediate and involuntary, and she hated that it showed. Dominic Moretti came around the desk. He didn't sit behind it. He sat in the chair beside her, angling his body toward her, and he said in a voice that had dropped even lower, "What happened to your leg?" "Nothing, old injury, I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Emma looked at him. "I came here to talk about my business." "I know why you came here." He held her gaze. "What happened to your leg?" "I appreciate your concern, but it's not relevant to someone hurt you." It wasn't a question. The way he said it flat and certain made the air in the room change. "I'm here about the workshop," Emma said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. "I've been preparing for this meeting for 6 months. I have samples and projections and a full proposal. If you could just give me the time to Marco." He didn't look away from her. He spoke to the man near the window. "Get Dr. Pellegrini's office on the phone. Tell them I'm sending someone over." "No." Emma's voice came out louder than she intended. "I don't need a doctor. I need 15 minutes. I need you to look at what I built and tell me if it's worth investing in. That is all I need from you. That is the only reason I came here." Dominic Moretti looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she didn't expect. "All right." He stood. He walked to his desk. He sat behind it properly this time, and he folded his hands on the surface, and he said, "Show me." She talked for 17 minutes. She talked about her grandfather, Thomas Carter, who had come from nothing and built a workshop with second-hand tools and 40 years of stubbornness. She talked about the reputation the workshop had built, neighborhood by neighborhood, commission by commission. She talked about the gap she had identified in the market for high-end custom furniture that combined traditional craft with sustainable materials, a gap that 3 different market analysts had confirmed in reports she had obtained at no small cost. She talked about the contracts she had already signed the clients on the wait list, the partnerships with suppliers she had spent 2 years cultivating. She laid samples on his desk. She opened her portfolio to the photographs. She showed him the numbers line by line. She talked the way she always talked when she was pitching, fast and precise and completely without apology, because the one thing she had learned in 3 years of trying to keep this business alive was that if you apologized for your ideas while you were presenting them, nobody believed in the ideas. Dominic Moretti said almost nothing. He looked at the samples. He looked at the photographs. He looked at the numbers. He asked 2 questions, one about her supplier contracts, one about her current debt structure, And both questions were so precise that she understood immediately that he had not spent the 17 minutes simply listening. He had spent them thinking. When she finished, the room was quiet. "Your debt is the problem," he said finally. "I know. Not because the business isn't viable. The business is viable. These contracts are real." He tapped the portfolio. "The market analysis is accurate. I've seen similar projections from 3 other sources in the last year." A pause. "But the debt is structured in a way that doesn't give you room to scale. You're servicing it before you're growing, which means you're running in place." Emma stared at him. "That's exactly what I've been trying to explain to every bank in the city for 8 months. Banks don't invest in craftspeople." He said it without contempt, simply as a fact. "Banks invest in models they understand. You're not a model they understand." "But you understand it." "I understand it." A long pause. "I'm going to need 3 days to look at your full financials before I can give you a number." Emma felt something shift in her chest, something that had been clenched very tightly for a very long time. "Okay," she said. "Okay, yes, of course, whatever you need." He nodded. He stood, which meant the meeting was ending, and she stood too, and the weight came back onto her leg, and she managed barely to keep her face neutral. She gathered her samples. She put her portfolio back in her bag. She turned toward the door. "Miss Carter?" She stopped. "The person who hurt you this morning." His voice was quiet. "Is this the first time?" She stood with her back to him for a moment. Her hand tightened on the strap of her bag. "The situation is handled," she said. "That's not what I asked either." She turned around. He was still standing behind his desk, watching her with that same look, the one that tried to understand the problem rather than just observe it. "I've been handling things my whole life," she said. "I'm good at it." "I don't doubt that." A pause. "But you're limping, and you drove yourself across the city to a business meeting, and you're standing in my office telling me a situation is handled when everything about you says it isn't." He held her gaze. "I've seen a lot of people try to manage things they shouldn't have to manage alone." Emma looked at him. "Are you always this direct with people you've known for 17 minutes? "Only when it's necessary." She almost smiled. She didn't. "I'll send over the financials by tomorrow morning." "Do that," he said. She walked to the door. The woman in the charcoal blazer was already there to escort her out. In the elevator going down, Emma pressed the button for the lobby and stood with her hand flat against the cool metal wall and focused on breathing until the burning in her leg became background noise again. 47 seconds, 46, 45. She made it to the sidewalk before her phone rang. Ryan's name on the screen. She stood on the pavement outside the Moretti building with the morning traffic moving around her and stared at his name and felt the familiar cold that settled in her stomach whenever she saw it. Not fear exactly. Something older and more complicated than fear. The feeling of something you couldn't quite get free of, no matter how many times you thought you had. She let it ring. She let it ring until it went to voicemail, and then she put the phone in her bag and started walking toward where she'd left her car, and she told herself, the way she always told herself, that she was fine, that she could handle this, that it was manageable. She had been telling herself that for 2 years. She had gotten very good at it. Marcus Webb had worked for Dominic Moretti for 11 years, and in those 11 years, he had developed a very specific understanding of his employer's moods. He could tell the difference between the silence that meant Dominic was satisfied and the silence that meant Dominic was thinking, and the silence that meant something had caught his attention in a way that was going to require action. The silence after Emma Carter left was the third kind. "Pull everything on Carter Woodcraft," Dominic said, not looking up from the portfolio she had left. "Full background, property records, debt history, any legal actions past or pending. That'll take a few hours." "I know how long it takes." Marcus made a note. The meeting went well then. The meeting was interesting. Dominic turned to one of the photographs, a credenza hand-built in black walnut with joinery that looked like it had taken months. "Run the address on Ashbury Street through the property database. I want to know who else has been inquiring about it in the last 12 months. Marcus looked at him. The building itself. The building itself. Something in the way he said it made Marcus put down his pen and give his employer his full attention. "This isn't just about the investment." It wasn't a question. Dominic Moretti set the photograph down and looked out the window at the city below. "Someone put their hands on her," he said. "This morning. before she came here. A pause. I want to know who. Marcus had worked for this man for 11 years. He knew what that tone meant. I'll make some calls, he said. Emma sat in the parking garage 3 blocks from her workshop and did not get out of the car. She told herself she was resting. She told herself her leg needed 5 minutes before she could walk back. She told herself it was practical, not emotional, not the thing it actually was, which was that she was sitting in a concrete parking garage at 10:45 in the morning, unable to make herself go back to the place where Ryan had grabbed her because some part of her was waiting for him to still be there. He wouldn't be there, she knew that. Ryan was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He knew exactly how far he could push before things became visible problems. He would have been gone before the first passerby saw what was happening. He was always gone before anyone saw. That was part of how it worked. She had understood somewhere around 8 months into the relationship that the thing Ryan Brooks was best at in the entire world was being invisible at the right moments. He was charming in public. He was attentive in front of friends. He said all the right things to all the right people, and when they were alone, he was a completely different person, but the version of him that existed alone with her had no witnesses, and without witnesses, nothing was real. Nothing left a mark that anyone else could see, except today. Today he had done it outside, on the street, in front of her own workshop, which meant the security camera on the corner of Ashbury and Tremont had probably caught the last 60 seconds of it, if anyone thought to look. She hadn't thought to look. She had been too busy trying to get to the meeting. She pulled out her phone. Ryan had called twice more while she was in the elevator. There was also a text. She opened it before she could stop herself. It read, "We need to talk. This is bigger than you understand. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Emma stared at the message for a long time. Then she put her phone face down on the passenger seat and sat in the concrete silence of the parking garage and thought about Dominic Moretti saying in that quiet, precise voice, "Someone put their hands on you." She thought about how strange it had felt to have someone see it without being told. She thought about how long it had been since anyone had looked at her that closely. She started the car. The workshop was exactly as she had left it, doors locked, the new commission half finished, in the center of the floor, sawdust still on the work table where she had been sanding the night before. Everything the same, everything fine. She told herself this several times while she unlocked the door and stepped inside and stood in the quiet of the space her grandfather had built and breathed in the smell of wood and linseed oil and the specific kind of silence that only exists in a place that has been worked in for decades. Thomas Carter had bought this building in 1978 for $30,000. He had spent the following 10 years renovating it by hand, room by room, corner by corner, until it was exactly what he needed: a working space on the ground floor storage below a small apartment above where Emma had spent most of her childhood weekends. He had run the workshop until he was 67 and his hands wouldn't cooperate anymore. And then he had handed it to his daughter. And when Emma's mother had moved to Phoenix and declared she had no interest in sawdust or splinters or the smell of varnish, it had come to Emma. She had been 24. She had known nothing about running a business. She had learned. She walked to the work table and ran her hand along the edge of the piece she'd been working on. A dining table, white oak, for a family in Brookline. She had 3 weeks to finish it. Under normal circumstances, 3 weeks was plenty of time. Under normal circumstances. Her phone buzzed. Not a call this time. A number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go. Then something made her answer. "Miss Carter?" A man's voice. Not Dominic. Older, rougher around the edges. "My name is Vincent Caruso. I work with Dominic Moretti. He wanted me to reach out directly." Emma's hand tightened on the phone. "About the investment? About something else?" A pause. "We've been looking into some things this morning. Based on what Mr. Moretti asked us to find, I think there are some things you need to know about your property." Another pause, longer this time. "About what's underneath it." The workshop was quiet around her. The commission sat half-finished on the floor. Outside, a truck passed on Ashbury Street, and the sound of the engine faded, and then the quiet came back even deeper than before. "What do you mean?" Emma said slowly, "underneath it?" Vincent Caruso took a breath, and then he said something that made Emma sit down on the nearest stool hard and forget entirely about the pain in her leg. It had started, he told her, with a property search. Standard background work, the kind of thing they did with any investment, pulling records, checking histories, looking for anything that might complicate the picture. What they found on the Ashbury Street property had nothing to do with the surface value of the building, the zoning classifications, the assessed price per square foot. What they found was what was underneath. In 1940, during a period of significant construction in that part of the city, a series of underground passages had been built connecting several properties along a 4-block stretch of Ashbury and the surrounding streets. The official records described them as utility corridors, but utility corridors in 1940 didn't get built to the specifications these ones had been built to. The dimensions were wrong, the reinforcement was wrong, the routing made no sense for utilities. These had been built for movement, for people or for goods or for both. And for decades, they had sat forgotten in the city's infrastructure records, buried under layers of subsequent construction and bureaucratic sediment, until the records had been quietly and expertly excavated by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Someone who had recently started making inquiries about the Carter building specifically. "Ryan Brooks," Emma said. A silence. "You know, I'm starting to understand." Her voice was careful. "He needs the building. He needs access to what's underneath the building. The tunnel entrance is in your basement. We think he's been trying to acquire the property for at least 8 months, and when you wouldn't sell, he shifted strategies. He started pressuring me personally," Emma said. "That would be consistent with what we're seeing." Emma sat on the stool in the middle of her grandfather's workshop and looked around at the walls that Thomas Carter had built, and the floors he had laid, and the work table he had built himself from salvaged oak, and she thought all of this. This whole building, this whole life, this whole fight to keep it alive, and under it, the whole time something that had made her a target before she even knew there was a target to be. "Who does he work for?" she asked. Another pause, longer. "Ms. Carter," Vincent Caruso said carefully, "that's the part that Mr. Moretti wants to discuss with you in person." Emma looked at her phone. She looked at the half-finished table in the middle of the floor. She looked at the door to the basement, which was closed the way she had left it that morning, the way she always left it, because there was nothing down there except old equipment and storage, and apparently a tunnel that had made her family's home into a target for people who operated in the kind of world she had spent her entire adult life trying to stay away from. "Tell Mr. Moretti," she said slowly, "that I'll be there in an hour." She ended the call. She sat in the quiet for a moment. Then she stood up, walked to the basement door, opened it, and looked down into the dark. There were wooden steps, old ones. She had descended them 1,000 times in her life without thinking about them. She stood at the top and looked down into the dark below, and for the first time in 30 years of knowing this space, she felt like a stranger in it. Then she closed the door, locked it, and started making calls of her own. Vincent Caruso was already waiting in the lobby when Emma walked back into the Moretti building. He was shorter than she expected from his voice. Compact, somewhere in his 60s, with the kind of face that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by most of it. He didn't offer his hand. He just looked at her with a measuring expression and said, "You walked here. I parked 2 blocks over. Your leg is fine," Emma said, the way she had been saying it all morning, the way she was going to keep saying it until it became true through sheer repetition. "Where are we going?" "Conference room on 12. Mr. Moretti is already there." They rode the elevator in silence. Emma kept her eyes on the numbers changing above the doors and ran through everything Vincent had told her on the phone, arranging it and rearranging it the way she arranged pieces in a commission, trying to find the configuration that made structural sense. A tunnel. Under her building, under the floor where she had learned to walk, where she had spent summers as a child watching her grandfather work, where she had cried the day they lowered him into the ground and then turned around and started running the business because there was nobody else, and she had refused to let it die with him. Under all of that, something hidden, something that someone wanted badly enough to send Ryan Brooks to her door. The elevator opened on 12, and Vincent walked her down a hallway and through a door into a room where Dominic Moretti was standing at a table covered in documents. He looked up when she entered. Something shifted in his expression, something fast and controlled there and gone before she could name it. "You walked," he said. "Everyone keeps saying that like it means something. It means your leg is worse than you're admitting." He pulled a chair out from the table. Not behind the desk this time. At the table, the kind of gesture that meant this conversation was different from the last one. "Sit down, Ms. Carter. We have a lot to go through." She sat. She looked at the documents spread across the table. Maps, property records, photographs. some of them old enough that the paper had gone soft at the edges. How much do you know about the history of your building? Dominic asked. Everything my grandfather told me. He bought it in 1978. Before that, it was a furniture wholesaler. Before that, something commercial. Standard neighborhood history. Before 1940, Emma paused. He never talked about before 1940. Dominic sat down across from her. He slid a document toward her, an old city infrastructure, filing the kind of bureaucratic form that only exists in the deep archives of municipal offices that nobody ever goes into. In 1938 and 1939, a man named Carmine Falcone purchased 4 adjacent properties along Ashbury Street through a series of shell companies. He had them connected underground. A pause. Falcone ran the largest illegal distribution network in Boston for 20 years. The tunnels were how he moved product without ever touching the street. Emma looked at the document, and my grandfather's building is one of the 4. The anchor point, the main access corridor, runs directly beneath your basement floor. The other 3 properties have changed hands multiple times, and the tunnel access points have been sealed or built over. Yours hasn't. Because nobody knew it was there. Because nobody went looking. Dominic folded his hands on the table. Until 8 months ago. Emma already knew the name before he said it. Ryan Brooks started making inquiries about your property through 3 separate real estate intermediaries. He was careful. He used different contacts, different company names. He didn't want the approach to be traceable. A pause. We traced it anyway. Who is he working for? Emma asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. You said on the phone there was something you needed to tell me in person. Dominic and Vincent exchanged a look. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Long enough. A man named Gerald Holt, Dominic said. He runs a logistics operation out of South Boston. On paper, it's a freight company. In reality, it moves significantly more than freight. Emma processed this. And he wants the tunnel. He wants the tunnel because his current operation has a problem. 3 of his primary distribution routes have been under federal surveillance for the last 14 months. He needs an alternative. An underground corridor that runs 4 blocks through a residential and commercial neighborhood with an access point inside a small private business that nobody is watching. Dominic stopped. You understand what that would mean. It would mean everything moving under my grandfather's floor, Emma said quietly. Everything he built turned into a route for... She stopped, pressed her lips together. How long has Ryan known about this? We believe Holt approached him approximately 10 months ago. Ryan had access to some old city records through a contact in the property assessor's office. He identified the tunnel network. Holt hired him to acquire the access point. And Ryan knew I wouldn't sell. Ryan knew you wouldn't sell to a stranger. So he came back. Dominic's voice was careful, precise. The way a surgeon is precise. You and Ryan, how long ago did the relationship end? Emma looked at the table. Officially 7 months ago, actually. She shook her head. It's complicated. When you're in something like that, the ending isn't one moment. It's 100 moments, most of them invisible. The room was quiet for a beat. He came back because he thought he could still manage you, Dominic said. Not a question, not a judgment, just a fact stated clearly the way facts should be stated. He thought the relationship gave him leverage he could use. He wasn't entirely wrong. She said it without flinching. I kept giving him chances to be the person I thought he was. That's on me. That's on him, Dominic said. She looked up. His expression hadn't changed. It was still controlled, still measured, but there was something underneath it, something that had edges. People who do what he did don't get credit for the trust they exploited. That's not how it works. Emma held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the documents. So what happens now? Vincent, who had been standing near the door through all of this, moved to the table. He set down a folder. That depends on what you want to do. Option 1, you sell the property. Quickly. To us at fair market value before Holt's people come back with a harder approach. The building gets secured, the tunnel access gets sealed, and you walk away with enough to start over somewhere else. Emma stared at the folder. Option 2. Option 2, Dominic said, is that you stay. You let us help you secure the property and document what's been happening to you. We build a case. We take it to the right people. A pause. It's slower. It's harder. And there will be a period of time where you are at elevated risk. Emma looked at him. You're giving me a real choice. I'm giving you the only thing that's actually mine to give. Information. The decision is yours. She sat with that for a moment. She thought about her grandfather's hands. She thought about the smell of linseed oil and sawdust. She thought about Ryan's forearm across her throat and his voice in her ear and the 48 hours he had given her, which meant she had until tomorrow morning before things escalated to whatever came next. If I sell, she said slowly, Holt eventually finds another way to access the tunnel. Different ownership doesn't seal it. He just has to start over with a new target. Dominic said nothing, waiting. And if I leave, whatever's down there becomes someone else's problem. Except it stays under that building. It stays under those streets. It stays in my grandfather's neighborhood. She pressed her palm flat on the table. Those are real people, real families. My grandfather's customers still live on those blocks. Their kids go to the same school I went to. Silence. I'm not selling, Emma said. Vincent made a sound that might have been the beginning of an objection. Dominic held up one hand and Vincent stopped. All right, Dominic said. For the second time that day, he said it with that same quiet finality, the way someone closes a door. A decision made, a direction committed to. Then we do this the other way. Emma exhaled. I need to know everything, not the version you give to people you're trying to protect from information. The actual everything. Dominic looked at her for a long moment. Most people who ask me for that regret it. I'm not most people. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent to it. No, he said, you're not. He reached into the folder Vincent had set down and pulled out a photograph. He set it on the table in front of her. A man in his 50s, heavy set, caught by a long lens in front of what looked like a warehouse. Ordinary looking in the way that truly dangerous people are always ordinary looking. The kind of face you pass on the street and forget immediately. Gerald Holt, Dominic said. He has 3 people currently watching your building. One of them has been there since 7 this morning. They're cataloging your movements, your hours, who comes and goes. Ryan gave them your schedule. Emma's stomach turned. She kept her face still. The camera on the corner of Ashbury and Tremont. This morning when Ryan... Our people pulled the footage 2 hours ago, Vincent said. We have the whole incident documented. Emma looked up sharply. You already did that. Mr. Moretti asked us to. She looked at Dominic. He met her eyes without apology. I told you, I noticed. She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it away the way she filed away things she couldn't process immediately and moved forward. What do they want? Just the building or... They want a 6-month window, Dominic said. Long enough to use the tunnel for one major operation. After that, the access point becomes less strategically necessary. They'd likely disappear. Let whoever owns the building go back to their life. A pause, assuming the owner cooperated and didn't cause problems. And if the owner did cause problems, the silence that followed was its own answer. Emma nodded slowly. She picked up the photograph of Gerald Holt and looked at it. She looked at his ordinary face and his ordinary jacket, and she thought about the fact that this man, who she had never met and who had never met her, had sent Ryan back into her life like a weapon aimed directly at everything she had spent 3 years trying to protect. She set the photograph down. Tell me about the tunnel, she said. What's actually down there? I want to know exactly what I'm standing on top of. Vincent opened his mouth. Dominic stopped him with a look. Why, Dominic asked. Not skeptical, genuinely asking. Because it's my building, Emma said. Whatever is under it, it's under my building. My grandfather walked those basement floors for 40 years, and he didn't know what was beneath them. I'm not going to be in the same position. She met Dominic's eyes. I want to see it. The silence stretched. Tonight, Dominic said finally, not alone, and not without people positioned outside first. He looked at Vincent. Make the arrangements. Vincent nodded and stepped out of the room, already reaching for his phone. Emma and Dominic sat across the table from each other in the quiet that followed. The documents between them, the photographs, the old infrastructure filing with Carmine Falcone's name on it, written in faded ink from a decade before either of them was born. Can I ask you something? Emma said. You can ask. Why are you doing this? The real reason, not the investment. She watched his face. You had a simple decision this morning. Woman walks into your office 45 minutes late. She's got a good business case and a bad debt structure. You tell her to come back in 3 days with her financials. Straightforward, professional, no complications. She paused. Instead, you had your people pull security footage and property records and a full background on Gerald Holt before I even got back to my workshop. That's not an investment decision. That's something else. Dominic was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. I grew up in the North End, he said finally. My mother ran a small business, alterations, dry cleaning, the kind of place that exists in every neighborhood and that nobody thinks about until it's gone. He stopped. Something moved behind his eyes. When I was 14, someone decided they wanted her location for their own purposes. They came to her. They were polite the first time. The second time they weren't. He looked at the table. She was alone. She didn't know who to call. She didn't know that there were people who could have helped her if she'd known how to reach them. A pause. She lost the business. Emma said nothing. I've spent 30 years building the kind of operation that can reach back, Dominic said. And I've learned how to recognize very quickly when someone is in a position my mother was in. His eyes came back to hers. You walked into my office limping and apologizing, and you didn't ask for a single thing except the chance to show me your work. You didn't ask for help. You probably wouldn't have. A beat. That's exactly why I'm offering it. The room was very quiet. Emma looked at this man she had known for 4 hours. This complicated, powerful, carefully controlled man who had just told her something true. She could feel the truth of it, the way you feel a shift in temperature physically unmistakably. Thank you, she said, for telling me that. He nodded once, and then with the efficiency of someone who has learned to compartmentalize emotion before it can interfere with action, he turned back to the documents on the table. We need to talk about tonight, he said, and about the next 48 hours. Ryan gave you a deadline, which means Holt gave Ryan a deadline, which means something is scheduled to happen with or without your cooperation, and we need to know what it is before it happens. Emma pulled the nearest document toward her. Then let's figure it out. She leaned over the table beside him and looked at the old map of the underground corridor and told herself she was not frightened. She told herself she was prepared. She told herself that whatever was underneath her grandfather's floor, she had faced harder things with less help, and she was still standing. Her leg throbbed. She ignored it. Outside the window, Boston moved in its ordinary afternoon rhythms. Traffic, pedestrians, the small machinery of a city going about its business, and 12 floors up, in a conference room, that smelled of coffee and old paper. Two people who had met that morning bent over maps of something that had been hidden for decades and started working out how to bring it into the light. 2 floors below, in a car parked across from the Moretti building's main entrance, a man with a phone pressed to his ear said quietly into the receiver, "She went back. She's still up there." A pause. "Yeah, with him." Another pause longer. "I know, I'll tell him." He ended the call, sat for a moment. Then he sent a single text to a number saved under no name. It read, "Change of plans. She's not going to cooperate." The response came back in under 30 seconds. Then we stopped asking nicely. The man in the car looked up at the building. 12th floor. He counted the windows. Then he started the engine and pulled into traffic and drove away. And in the conference room 12 floors up, neither Emma nor Dominic knew that the clock on their 48 hours had just been moved forward. By the time they figured that out, the deadline would already be gone. They didn't find out about the accelerated timeline from a phone call or a warning or any of the channels Dominic's network normally used to move information. They found out because at 4:47 in the afternoon, while Emma and Dominic were still in the conference room on the 12th floor, working through property records and tunnel schematics, Marcus walked in without knocking and set a phone on the table in front of Dominic with a single word. "Live." The phone was showing a security feed, Emma's workshop, Ashbury Street, and 2 men she didn't recognize were standing outside the front door, and one of them was holding something against the lock, and the other one had his back to the camera in a way that was clearly deliberate, blocking the view of what the first man's hands were doing. Emma was on her feet before she fully processed what she was seeing. "That's my building." "Sit down," Dominic said. "They're breaking into..." "Emma!" His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. There was a quality to it that cut through her momentum the way a hand on a shoulder cuts through a crowd. "Sit down. My people are already on the block. If you walk in there right now alone, you give them exactly what they want. A reason to put their hands on you again. He held her gaze. Sit down and let me handle this. She sat. Every muscle in her body resisted it. She sat anyway. Dominic was already on the phone. He spoke quickly in a shorthand that Emma could only partially follow: street names, positions, a set of instructions delivered with the kind of precision that made clear this was not the first time he had managed something like this from a distance. He ended the call, picked up the phone showing the feed, watched. Emma watched beside him. 60 seconds, 90. The two men at the door had stopped. One of them turned to look down the street, a sharp, alert look, the look of someone who has suddenly become aware of being watched. He said something to the other man. The other man straightened up, put whatever he had been holding back in his pocket. They walked away, casually. The way people walk when they want to look like they weren't doing anything. They'll report back, Dominic said. And when they do, whoever sent them will know they didn't get inside. Which means the next attempt won't be so casual, Emma finished. Correct. He set the phone down, looked at her. The deadline Ryan gave you, 48 hours from this morning. That's tomorrow, 8 or 9 a.m. But they already moved it up. They moved the first probe up. That was reconnaissance. They wanted to know if the building was empty, if there was a security system, what they were working with. He paused. The actual move will come tonight, after dark, after they have had time to regroup and adjust. Emma pressed both hands flat on the table. She needed the solid surface under her palms. She needed something that didn't move. My tools are in there, the commission I'm working on, everything my grandfather left. Nothing in that building is worth more than you staying out of it tonight. She looked at him. You don't get to make that call. I'm not making it. I'm giving you the information and asking you to make the right one. A beat. There's a difference. The distinction landed. She sat with it for a moment. Outside, the afternoon light was shifting, moving toward the particular quality that Boston afternoon light gets in early fall, that long sideways gold that makes everything look like it's in the last few minutes before something changes. I want someone inside, she said, not to confront them, just to document what they do if they get in. If they tamper with the building, if they try to access the basement, I want it on record. Dominic considered this for exactly 3 seconds. Done. Vincent will coordinate. He looked at Marcus. Get 3 people into the building before 6. I want cameras in the basement and the ground floor. Motion sensitive. Marcus nodded and left the room. Emma exhaled slowly. Okay, she said. Okay. She looked at the documents still spread across the table. Then let's use the time we have. You said Holt has something scheduled. If they're moving tonight, there's a reason. Something that requires the tunnel specifically tonight. What is it? Dominic pulled a document from the bottom of the stack. He had clearly been working toward this, holding it back until she was ready to hear it. 3 days ago, a federal task force executed a raid on a freight warehouse in Quincy, Holt's primary distribution hub. They seized approximately 40% of his current inventory. He set the document down. He lost a significant shipment. He needs to move the remainder before the task force traces the secondary routes. The tunnel under your building is his fastest option. Tonight, Emma said, tonight. Which means if we can document what moves through that tunnel, it connects Holt directly to the seized inventory, which connects him to everything the task force has already built. Dominic leaned back. It ends him. Emma stared at the table. She was doing the math, and the math was coming back the same way every time she ran it. And Ryan is a problem we handle separately. Something in the way he said separately made Emma look up. There was a flatness in his expression that she was starting to recognize the thing he did when the version of himself he was showing the world and the version doing the actual calculation had diverged. Dominic, she used his first name without deciding to. What does separately mean? He met her eyes. It means he doesn't come near you again. The specifics are mine to manage. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have. She held his gaze for a long moment. I need him to face actual consequences. Legal ones, not the other kind. Something shifted in his expression. Not irritation, something more complicated. The legal system takes time, and in that time he has access to you. I know how the legal system works. I grew up watching it fail people. She didn't look away. I'm still asking for it because I need this to be done in a way I can live with after. The silence stretched between them. All right, Dominic said. Third time he had said it, she was starting to understand that when Dominic Moretti said, all right, it was not capitulation. It was a door closing, a commitment made and locked. Thank you, she said. He nodded, and then his phone rang, and the next phase of the evening began. It was Vincent. We've got a problem, he said, and Dominic put the call on speaker. The three people watching the building, two of them just left. We've got eyes on one. He went into a diner on Tremont, ordered coffee, settling in for a wait. A pause. The third one we've lost. Lost how? Dominic asked. He went around the back of Emma's building 40 minutes ago and didn't come out the front. We've had the front covered. Either he's still in the alley or there's a back access point we didn't know about, Dominic said. Emma's head came up. There is, she said. Both men looked at her. My grandfather had a delivery entrance on the side alley. It's been locked and bolted for years, but the door's original. Old hardware. She was already thinking. If someone knew what they were looking for, knew it was there. They're already inside, Vincent said through the phone. The room went very still. Dominic was on his feet in one motion. Pull everyone to the perimeter. Nobody goes in yet. I want to know what he's doing before we move. He looked at Emma. What's in the basement? Storage, old equipment, the access to the tunnel apparently, though I've never seen it. If he's reconnaissance, he's trying to map the access point. Confirm the tunnel is usable. He was already moving toward the door. If he's not reconnaissance, he's already opening it, Emma said. Dominic stopped, turned. Can you reach your security system from your phone cameras inside the building? Emma was already pulling her phone out. I have 2 interior cameras. I installed them last year after someone tried to break in. She opened the app. Her hands were completely steady. She noticed this about herself with a kind of detached surprise. Ground floor is clear. She switched feeds. Basement. She stopped. On the small screen, grainy and green-tinted, from the night vision mode the camera had switched to, in the low light a man was crouching in the corner of her basement. He had a flashlight. He was moving along the far wall, the old stone foundation wall that had been there since before her grandfather bought the building, running his hands along the surface, looking for something. He's at the foundation wall, Emma said. Her voice was controlled. Every part of her was running on the particular kind of adrenaline that doesn't feel like adrenaline, the cold, clear kind that makes everything sharper without making anything louder. He's looking for the tunnel entrance. Dominic looked at the screen over her shoulder. He was close enough that she could feel the tension in him that controlled directed energy, that she was coming to understand was how he existed under pressure. Not agitated, focused, the way a current focuses when the channel narrows. Vincent, he said into the phone, side alley entrance, now, but quiet. I don't want him spooked. A pause, and call Detective Reyes. Emma looked up. You have a contact in the police department. I have contacts in most places. He watched the screen. On the camera feed, the man had stopped moving. He was pressing both palms against a section of the wall, pushing. He's found it. How do you want to play this? Emma asked. We let him open it, Dominic said. We document everything, and then we close the door behind him. Emma understood what he meant, literally and otherwise. And Holt is coming tonight expecting a clear route. What he's going to find instead is a documented operation in a very specific problem. Dominic handed the phone back to her. Keep watching. Tell me if anything changes. He stepped into the hallway to make calls, and Emma sat in the conference room alone with the small screen and the green-tinted image of a man trying to break open something her grandfather had walked over for 40 years without knowing it was there. She thought about Thomas Carter. Broad hands, slow voice, the patience of someone who had learned that good work can't be rushed. He had bought this building because it was what he could afford, and because the neighborhood was his neighborhood, and because he believed in building something that lasted. He had poured his whole life into those walls. He had no idea what was underneath them. He had no idea that decades after his death, someone would try to use what was underneath them to hollow out everything above. Emma Carter looked at the screen and felt something harden in her chest. Not anger exactly, something colder and more permanent than anger. Something that knew exactly what it wanted and was done being uncertain about whether it had the right to want it. She was keeping this building. She was keeping every inch of it. She was keeping it because her grandfather had given it to her, And because 3 years of fighting for it had cost her more than she could fully account for, and because the man currently pressing his hands against her foundation wall in the green-tinted dark was not going to be the thing that ended it. None of them were. Dominic came back into the room. He looked at her face, and something in his own expression settled like a question he'd been carrying had just been answered. He opened it, Emma said, looking at the screen. On the camera feed, the man had found the lever mechanism, old iron industrial, the kind of hardware that predated everything currently in the building, and the section of wall had swung inward. Not far, 18 inches, maybe 2 feet, but open. Vincent has him, Dominic said. They're letting him go in. He pulled up his own phone. A different feed. His people had moved fast, placed a camera of their own in the last 20 minutes. The angle was better than Emma's. She could see the man step through the opening. She could see the passage beyond. Stone walls, low ceiling, a floor that looked worn smooth by decades of use. It's real, she said. Very real. It's been down there my whole life, since before your grandfather owned the building. Dominic sat beside her. He pulled the phone so they could both see the feed. Their shoulders were nearly touching. Neither of them moved away. Reyes is sending 2 people in plain clothes. They'll be in position before 10. Emma looked at the time on her phone. 7:18 p.m. How long before Holt moves? If he's smart after midnight, less foot traffic, more time to work. A pause. He's smart. So we wait. We wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Emma had always known this about herself, that she was built for action, for the forward motion of working towards something, and that sitting still while something important was happening somewhere she couldn't reach was its own specific kind of torment. She sat still. At 8:40, Vincent called. Ryan Brooks just left his apartment, he said. He's in a car heading toward Ashbury. Emma went very still. Dominic watched her face. He's not going to reach the building, and he said, into the phone, the car, do not let it reach Ashbury Street. Understood. Emma looked at him. What does that mean practically? Practically, it means his car is going to have a problem 2 blocks before he gets there. A tire, probably. Something that keeps him occupied and visible on a well-lit street for the next hour. A small pause. Nothing happens to him. He just doesn't arrive. She exhaled. Okay. At 9:15, Marcus came in with food sandwiches from Somewhere Coffee in proper cups, the kind of logistical thoughtfulness that Emma was starting to understand was built into how this operation ran. She hadn't eaten since morning. She ate without tasting any of it. At 10:03, Detective Reyes called Dominic directly. Emma listened to one side of a conversation that was clipped and professional and ended with Dominic saying, "Give us until they're inside, then it's yours." At 10:47, the first vehicle appeared on the camera covering the alley behind Emma's building. Then a second. Emma watched the screen. Her coffee had gone cold. She hadn't noticed. That's them, she said. That's them, Dominic confirmed. 4 men. Moving with the kind of practiced quiet that comes from doing this before in other alleys, on other nights, in other people's buildings. They went to the side entrance, the old delivery door, and it opened without difficulty because the man who had gone in earlier had unlocked it from inside before Vincent's people had quietly redirected him out through the tunnel's far end, which opened 2 blocks over into the basement of a building that Dominic Moretti happened to own. The 4 men went inside. Dominic was on the phone in seconds. Now, he said, Reyes, they're inside, ground floor heading to the basement. You have everything you need. He paused, listening. Yes. Another pause. I know. I'll stay out of it from here. He lowered the phone. Emma looked at him. You're trusting the police to handle this. I'm trusting Reyes to handle this. There's a difference. A slight pause. And yes, is that, she stopped, reconsidered the question she had been about to ask. Is that hard for you? He looked at her. The question had surprised him. She could see it, the small break in the controlled surface. Yes, he said simply, it is. They sat with that honesty between them and watched the feeds. At 11:22, the operation ended. Not dramatically. Not the way things end in stories with a single loud moment that resets everything. It ended the way real things end, with a series of smaller moments, each one closing off a possibility until the space of what could still go wrong had narrowed to nothing. Reyes's people had come in through the front. Dominic's had covered every exit. The four men in the basement had been documented on camera in the act of accessing a tunnel that connected to Holt's seized inventory. Ryan's car was still sitting 2 blocks away with a flat tire and Ryan in the driver's seat on the phone loudly and fruitlessly with a towing company. At 11:58, Dominic received a text from Reyes that read simply clean. He showed it to Emma. She read it. She read it a second time. She handed the phone back. It's not over, she said. Not a complaint, just a fact clearly stated. No, he agreed. Holt is still out there. Ryan is still a problem. The tunnel still exists. He paused. But tonight, nobody got through it. And now there are people in federal custody who are going to have very specific reasons to talk about where their instructions came from. Emma nodded. She stood up. Her leg protested. She had been sitting for hours and the bruising had stiffened in the cold conference room air. She moved toward the window and stood looking out at the city. I want to go to my building, she said, tomorrow morning, in daylight, with people I trust walking in ahead of you. She started to object. He spoke before she could. Emma? First time he had used her first name without the formality of her last. She noticed it the way you notice a shift in weather. Please. She turned and looked at him across the conference room. He was still seated at the table surrounded by documents and cold coffee and the remnants of a long day that had begun with her limping into his office and apologizing for being late. She looked at this man who had spent 11 hours fighting for something he had no obligation to fight for, who had called contacts and pulled records and positioned people and made careful strategic decisions designed to protect a building and a business and a woman he had known for less than a day. Who had told her about his mother's shop in the North End in the quiet of an afternoon and who had not looked away when she asked him hard questions. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said, and he exhaled barely, almost imperceptibly, the way someone exhales when they have been holding their breath for longer than they realized. Outside, Boston settled into its late-night rhythms. The streets quieted. The traffic thinned. In an alley on Ashbury Street, the old delivery door was locked and secured by people who knew how to secure things properly. In a basement below Emma Carter's workshop, a section of foundation wall stood open onto a passage that had carried decades of darkness through it, and now, for the first time in all those decades, there were cameras watching. And 2 blocks away, Ryan Brooks was still waiting for a tow truck that was going to take another 40 minutes to arrive. He didn't know yet what had happened. He would find out in the morning. And when he did, the 48 hours he had given Emma Carter were going to mean something very different than he had intended when he pressed her against that wall and said the words. Because Emma Carter had used those 48 hours better than he had. She always had. She slept on a couch in Dominic's office. Not because he asked her to, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because at 12:40 in the morning, when the last of the calls had been made and the last of the feeds had gone quiet, and the conference room on 12 felt like a place she had been living in for years rather than hours, Dominic had walked her down the hall and opened a door and said, "There's a couch. It's decent. You shouldn't be alone tonight." And something in her had simply stopped arguing. She woke at 6:14 to the sound of his voice through the wall. He was on the phone. She couldn't make out the words, only the cadence controlled deliberate. The verbal equivalent of someone moving carefully through a space where the floor might not hold. She lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling and listened to the rhythm of it and thought about everything that had happened in the last 22 hours. Her leg felt better, still bruised, still stiff from the hours of sitting and the cold of the conference room air. But the sharpest edge of it had dulled the way pain dulls when you finally stop fighting it and let your body do what bodies do. She sat up, found her jacket folded over the arm of the couch. She hadn't done that, which meant someone had, which meant she had fallen asleep before she intended to, and someone had done a small, quiet thing to make her more comfortable while she slept. She put the jacket on and went into the hallway. Dominic was at the window in the conference room, phone to his ear, his back to the door. He turned when he heard her. His expression shifted, that fast, controlled thing she had learned to watch for, and he said something brief into the phone and ended the call. Ryan was arrested at 2 in the morning, he said. Reyes pulled him in. The security footage from the corner camera on Ashbury, the documented assault, and his phone records connecting him to the men found in your basement. It's enough to hold him. Emma stood in the doorway and absorbed this. How long? Long enough. His lawyer will make noise, but the evidence is specific. A pause. And 2 of the 4 men taken from the basement last night have already started talking. About Holt. About the operation, about who gave them the access information. He looked at her steadily. Ryan's name is coming up in those conversations. She nodded. She felt something release in her chest. Not joy, not relief exactly. More like the sensation of a weight that has been pressing down for so long, you forgot it was there until it wasn't. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. You can go to the building this morning. I'll have 2 people with you. I need to go alone first. She met his eyes before he could object. 5 minutes, just me in the space before anyone else comes in. She stopped, tried to find the words for something she had never quite had to explain before. My grandfather built that place. Every time something went wrong, I went back to it, to stand in it, to remember what it was built for. She paused. I need that this morning before everything else starts. Dominic looked at her for a long moment. She could see him weighing it, the security concern against the thing she was actually asking for, which was not permission, but recognition. Recognition that some needs are not negotiable. My people will be outside, he said, the moment you open that door. That's fine. And you call me when you're inside. Dominic, not for my sake. His voice was quiet. For mine. The distinction made her pause, made her look at him more carefully. He was still controlled, still precise, but underneath the precision this morning, there was something that hadn't been there the day before. Something that looked, if she was reading it right, remarkably like fear. Not the kind you perform, the kind you carry. I'll call you, she said. She took a cab to Ashbury Street. The city was still in its early morning quietness, that particular urban hush that exists for about an hour before the full machinery of a weekday starts up. She paid the driver and stood on the pavement outside her workshop and looked at the building. It looked exactly as it always did. Red brick, old windows. The sign her grandfather had made by hand, Carter Woodcraft, established 1978, slightly weathered now, which she had always meant to restore and somehow never gotten to. The front door with its familiar lock. The window where she sometimes put finished pieces for display. She put her key in the lock and went inside. She called Dominic before the door was fully closed behind her. I'm in, she said. I know, he said. I can see the door from the feed. A pause. Take your 5 minutes. She walked through the workshop slowly. She ran her hand along the edge of the dining table she had been working on, the white oak commission, still half finished, the surface she had been sanding the morning before when everything changed. The wood was cool under her fingers, solid, real in the way that only hand-worked wood is real, carrying the evidence of the labor that shaped it in every surface. She stood in the center of the floor and breathed. This was hers, all of it. The tools her grandfather had collected over 40 years. The workbench he had built himself. The walls he had insulated and repainted and insulated again when the Boston winters came for them. The floor she had helped him refinish when she was 9 years old, and he had let her sand one section by herself slowly until it was right. Nobody had taken this from her. They had tried. They had sent Ryan, and Ryan had sent his hands against her throat and his hour's knee into her leg. And Holt had sent 4 men through her basement in the middle of the night, and all of it had been designed to make her small enough to move. And she was still standing in the center of her grandfather's floor. She went to the basement door, opened it, looked down at the steps she had descended 1,000 times, went down. The section of foundation wall was closed. Vincent's people had secured it after Reyes's team finished their documentation. But she could see where it was now that she knew to look. The seam in the stone, the iron mechanism, old and heavy, set into the wall at a height that looked like nothing like a structural bracket until you understood what it was. She stood in the basement of her grandfather's building and looked at the hidden door in the wall and thought he never knew. He walked down these steps for 30 years and he never knew. And then she thought it doesn't matter. What mattered was what he built above it. What mattered was what was still standing. She went back upstairs. Okay, she said into the phone. Let them in. The next 3 hours were organized chaos. Reyes's team came through to complete their documentation. Dominic's people swept the building for anything the intruders might have left behind, devices, markers, anything that could indicate the building was still being monitored. A locksmith changed every lock and rebolted the old delivery entrance with hardware that would take significantly more than a bent tool to compromise. Emma made coffee in the small kitchen at the back of the workshop and answered questions, and signed things and watched all of these people move through her grandfather's space and told herself this was necessary, this was protective, this was the process of making things right. And it was all of those things, but it was also exhausting in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. At 9:40, Dominic arrived. He came in through the front door with the same quality of presence she had noticed in his office, that thing where the room reorganizes slightly around where he is standing. He looked at the workshop with the careful attention of someone who is seeing something for the first time and knows it matters. "This is where you grew up," he said. "Summers and weekends," Emma said. "My grandfather used to say the wood would teach me patience if I let it. I was 10. I thought he was being old-fashioned." She paused. He was right. Dominic walked slowly to the work table. He looked at the half-finished dining table without touching it. "White oak," he said. "You know wood." "I know enough." He turned to look at her. "How long to finish it?" 3 weeks under normal circumstances." She managed a tired version of a smile. "Circumstances have been abnormal. They're about to get more normal." He said it with certainty, not comfort. The distinction mattered to her. Holt is being looked at by people whose attention he cannot buy his way out of. The 4 men in custody are trading information for consideration. And Ryan? He stopped. Emma watched his face. "What about Ryan?" "Ryan called his lawyer at 2:15 this morning. His lawyer called another lawyer. That second lawyer is one of Gerald Holt's known associates." He paused. "It confirms what we already suspected about the nature of the relationship, and it gives Reyes something to add to the chain." Emma sat down on a stool, not from weakness, from the particular weight of information that keeps arriving after you thought you had processed all of it. "He was never really mine," she said. "Not quite to Dominic, mostly to herself. I mean, I knew that eventually, but he was Holt's from the beginning. The whole relationship was designed to give him access," Dominic said quietly. Yes, she had known this. She had understood it intellectually since Vincent had laid out the timeline in the conference room the day before. But understanding something intellectually and feeling it land in the body are two different things, and right now it was landing the full weight of 2 years of a relationship that had been from its first moment a form of surveillance. Every argument that kept her off balance, every criticism that made her question her own judgment, every moment she had spent wondering if she was too much, too loud, too ambitious, all of it engineered. "I keep waiting to feel angry," she said. Dominic moved to the stool across from her and sat. Not behind a desk, not at a table full of documents, just on a stool in the middle of her workshop. "And mostly I feel tired." She shook her head. "And then I feel angry at myself for feeling tired instead of angry." "That's not how it works," he said. She looked up. "You don't get to control the sequence," he said. "You feel what comes in the order it comes. Trying to manage the emotional timeline is..." He stopped, reconsidered. "It's like trying to sand against the grain. You can do it, but it damages the surface." Emma stared at him. "Did you just make a woodworking metaphor?" "I absorbed some information walking through your workshop." She laughed. It came out suddenly without warning, and it surprised her, the realness of it, the involuntary quality of it, the way it broke something open that had been sealed tight since yesterday morning. She laughed, and then the laugh was close to something else, something that had the same pressure behind it, but a different release, and she put her hand over her mouth and breathed until the pressure equalized. "Sorry," she said. "Don't apologize," he said firmly. "Don't apologize for that." She lowered her hand, looked at him. "You said that like you've said it before." "I've thought it before." A pause. "About you specifically since approximately the moment you walked into my office and apologized for being late after someone had just hurt you." The workshop was quiet around them. The sounds of Reyes' team had moved to the back of the building. The locksmith was finishing up at the rear entrance. Everything was moving forward, processing, resolving, and in the middle of all of it, Emma Carter and Dominic Moretti sat on stools in her grandfather's workshop and occupied the strange particular space that exists between a crisis ending and the rest of life beginning. "I've been apologizing my whole life," Emma said. It came out more honest than she intended, for taking up space, for needing things, for being too much of everything Ryan told me was too much. She paused. "I did it in your office. I walked in 45 minutes late, injured, and the first thing I did was apologize." You also gave one of the best pitches I've heard in 20 years of sitting across tables from people who want my money, Dominic said, without a single apology in it. She looked at him. You know how to fight for what you build, he said. You just haven't figured out that you're allowed to fight for yourself with the same energy. She sat with that. Outside on Ashbury Street, a delivery truck passed, and the sound of it filled the workshop briefly and then faded. Morning was becoming mid-morning. The city was fully awake now. The investment, Emma said, the reason I came to see you, is that still, I reviewed your financials last night. He said it with the same matter-of-fact precision he applied to everything. Between the conference room and when you fell asleep, Marcus sent the documents through. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and produced a single folded paper, set it on the work table between them. My offer. Emma opened it. She looked at the number. Then she looked at the terms. She read every line twice the way her grandfather had taught her to read every contract slowly, without rushing, because the sentences you skip are always the ones that matter. The number was more than she had asked for. The terms were structured to give the business room to grow before it had to service the investment. There were no clauses she didn't understand. There was no language designed to obscure. She understood, a fair offer, more than fair. Why more than I asked for, she said. Because what you asked for was based on what you thought you could get, not what the business actually needs to scale properly. He paused. I told you yesterday, you were running in place. This gives you room to run forward. Emma folded the paper, held it in both hands. People are going to talk, I know, she said, about this, about you being involved with my business after everything that happened. They'll say I owe you. They'll say it's not a real investment. People talk, Dominic said. Let them. He met her eyes. I've been running my operation for 20 years in a city that has very specific opinions about who I am and what I do. I made peace with the noise a long time ago. A pause. The question is whether you can. She thought about this, thought about her neighbors, her customers, the community that had watched her fight to keep this place open. Thought about what it would mean to have Dominic Moretti's name associated with Carter Woodcraft. Thought about all the ways that association could be misread or weaponized or turned into a story that had nothing to do with the actual truth of what had happened between two people in a conference room over old maps and cold coffee. I'm not ashamed of any of it, she said finally. No, he agreed. You shouldn't be. She unfolded the paper again, looked at the number one more time. I'm going to need my lawyer to look at this before I sign anything. Of course. And I'm going to negotiate 2 of these clauses. Something in his expression warmed, almost imperceptibly. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. She set the paper on the work table. Outside, she could hear Reyes's last officer finishing up and the front door opening and closing. The building was clearing out. The morning was moving forward. Dominic, she said. He waited. Yesterday morning, I was lying on the pavement outside this building. She kept her voice steady. And now I'm sitting inside it, and the men who put me there are either in custody or about to be, and there's an investment offer on my grandfather's work table. She paused. None of that would have happened without you. Some of it would have happened, he said. You were already fighting. You'd been fighting for 3 years. Not like this. No, he admitted, not like this. The silence between them was different from the silences earlier. The operational ones, the weighted ones, the ones full of decisions being made and information being processed. This one was open, breathing. The kind of silence that only exists when the immediate crisis has passed, and what remains is the question of what comes next and whether 2 people are going to have the courage to ask it honestly. I want to tell you something, Dominic said. Emma waited. When Marcus brought me the footage of what Ryan did to you outside this building, before I had met you, before I knew anything other than that you had walked into my office, hurt and dignified and completely unwilling to ask for help. He stopped. Something moved through his expression, a rare disruption in the controlled surface. I have been in this business for 20 years. I have seen people use power against people who had none. I have been one of those people in certain contexts at certain times. He said it without flinching. Watching that footage, I made a decision that had nothing to do with investment or strategy or any of the things I normally use to justify what I do. He met her eyes fully. I decided that it was going to stop, that whatever was being done to you was going to stop. And I was going to be the mechanism by which it stopped. A pause. Not because it was smart business, because it was the right thing. And I have not always been in the business of doing the right thing, but this was not a moment I was willing to miss. Emma looked at him for a long moment. At this complicated man in his careful suit sitting on a stool in her grandfather's workshop, who had spent 24 hours dismantling a criminal network and protecting her building and telling her not to apologize for existing, and who was now telling her with an honesty that cost him something that she had made him want to be better than he had been. I believe you, she said. He nodded, once. And for what it's worth, she said, you didn't miss it. The morning light came through the workshop windows the way it always had, at an angle that hit the work table directly that her grandfather had said was the best natural light in the whole neighborhood for seeing the true color of a piece of wood. Emma had grown up with that light. She knew exactly what it looked like when it was good. It looked like this. Her phone rang. Marcus was something that needed Dominic's attention. He stood, answered it, moved to the far end of the workshop with the efficiency she had come to expect from him. Emma picked up the investment offer from the work table and read it again. All of it. Every line. Then she picked up the sanding block she had left on the table the morning before when Ryan's hands had interrupted everything. She went back to the white oak dining table. She started sanding. Not because everything was resolved, not because the danger was completely past or the emotional accounting of the last 24 hours was anywhere near complete, but because the table needed finishing and the family in Brookline was waiting and the work didn't stop because life happened around it. The work never stopped. It just waited patiently for the person who understood its value to come back to it. Dominic finished his call and stood at the end of the workshop watching her work. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The sound of the sanding block moving along the grain of the white oak filled the morning air of the workshop steady and purposeful, and outside on Ashbury Street, the city moved through its ordinary rhythms, and the sign above the door that said Carter Woodcraft, established 1978, stood in the morning light exactly where it had always stood, exactly where it was going to keep standing. The white oak dining table was delivered to the family in Brookline on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks and 2 days after Emma had stood in her grandfather's workshop and made the decision to keep fighting. She drove it herself. She always delivered the important commissions herself, not because she couldn't afford help, but because her grandfather had done it that way, and she had decided early that some things were worth doing in the exact way they were meant to be done. The woman who answered the door was in her 60s with the kind of face that had laughed a lot over many years. And when she saw the table, she put both hands over her mouth and stood that way for a long moment without speaking. My grandmother had one like this, she finally said. Same wood, same joinery. I never thought I'd... She stopped, shook her head. It's exactly right. Emma drove back to Ashbury Street with the windows down and the radio off, and the particular feeling she got after a delivery that had landed exactly as it was supposed to, a feeling that had no precise word in English, but that she thought of simply as rightness. The sense that a thing had found the place it was meant to be. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since the night in the conference room, since Reyes's people had moved through her basement, since Dominic had sat on a stool in her workshop and told her he had decided to be the mechanism by which the damage stopped. 3 weeks since Ryan Brooks had been walked out of a holding cell and into a courtroom looking smaller than she had ever seen him look, in a suit that suddenly didn't fit the way it used to now that the performance he had been maintaining was no longer necessary. She had not gone to the arraignment. Marcus had offered to send someone with her. Dominic had said very carefully that he would understand either way. She had decided she didn't need to see Ryan in a courtroom to know that what he had done was real. She already knew it was real. She had known it with her body before she knew it with her mind, and she didn't need a legal proceeding to confirm what she had lived. What she needed was the workshop, the commissions, the work. So that's what she did. She pulled up to the building on Ashbury Street and parked and sat for a moment looking at the sign above the door. Carter Woodcraft, established 1978. Someone had repainted it while she wasn't watching. She had come in one Monday morning to find it fresh and clean. The letters precise, the wood sealed against the weather, and when she asked Marcus who had authorized it, he had given her a look that told her everything without saying anything at all. She had called Dominic about it. You had my sign repainted, she said. It needed it, he said. You could have asked. Would you have said yes? A pause. Probably not immediately. That's why I didn't ask. She had been annoyed for approximately 4 minutes. Then she had looked at the sign again, at the care in the lettering, the way the wood was properly sealed now for the first time in years, and the annoyance had dissolved into something that she was still learning to hold without immediately converting it into a safer emotion. That was the ongoing work of these 3 weeks, not the furniture. That was the easy part. The ongoing work was the internal kind, the slow, unglamorous process of dismantling the architecture of everything Ryan's voice had built inside her head over 2 years. The critical voice that sounded like hers but wasn't. The one that cataloged her failures with precision and her achievements with suspicion. The one that had convinced her over many months of careful repetition that needing things was weakness and asking for help was defeat. She was learning slowly and imperfectly, and not without resistance, that this was wrong. She went into the workshop and hung her jacket and put on the apron that had been her grandfather's and went to the bench where the next commission was waiting. Her phone buzzed. Dominic. Reyes wants to meet this afternoon, he said without preamble. The way he always started calls, as if the greeting was an unnecessary delay between him and the information. She had stopped being startled by it and started finding it quietly one of her favorite things about him. 3 o'clock. His office. What's happened? Holt's lawyer contacted the DA this morning. He wants to make a deal. Emma set down the chisel she had been reaching for. A deal. He's offering testimony against 2 larger organizations in exchange for reduced charges. A pause. Reyes thinks he'll take it, which means the case against Holt specifically may end differently than we wanted. The workshop was quiet around her. She took a breath. And Ryan is not part of the deal. His charges stand. Dominic's voice was precise, deliberate, making sure she heard the distinction clearly. Holt is giving up people above him. Ryan has nobody above him to give up. He goes to trial. She exhaled slowly. How long? 6 to 8 months before it gets to court, maybe longer. A pause. I know that's not what you want to hear. No, she agreed, but it's the truth, so. She picked the chisel back up. 3 o'clock, I'll be there. I'll send a car. Dominic, I have a car. Your car makes a sound when you turn left. That means the front suspension needs attention. She stopped. How do you know what sound my car makes? A brief pause. Marcus mentioned it. Marcus mentioned it, she repeated, because Marcus has been paying attention to my car. Someone should. She held the phone against her shoulder and looked at the ceiling for a moment and breathed through the complicated feeling that arrived whenever Dominic did things like this. The small, practical, entirely unasked for acts of care that he delivered with the same matter-of-fact efficiency he applied to everything else, as if caring for things was simply another form of correct management and required no more acknowledgement than any other operational decision. She was learning that this was how he loved things. She wasn't ready to say that word yet, but she was learning the shape of it. Fine, she said. Send the car. She heard something at the other end of the call that might in another man have been satisfaction. The meeting with Reyes that afternoon was not what she expected. She had prepared herself for bureaucratic language, for the careful lawyered speech of a police detective walking a civilian through the limitations of a system that could only do so much with what it had. She had been through enough difficult conversations in the last 3 weeks to know how to sit in a room and hear things she didn't want to hear and remain functional. What she had not prepared for was Reyes sliding a folder across his desk and saying, I want you to see this before it becomes public record. Inside the folder was a financial document. She looked at it. Then she looked at Reyes. What am I looking at? Ryan Brooks has been systematically diverting funds from small businesses in this neighborhood for the last 4 years, Reyes said. Not just yours. 7 other businesses on and around Ashbury Street. He identified owners who were asset-rich and cash-poor people with valuable property and not enough liquidity to fight back if someone came for them. He brought these properties to Holt's attention. He got a finder's fee for each one. A pause. Your workshop was the most valuable target because of the tunnel, but you weren't the first. And if things had gone differently, you wouldn't have been the last. Emma sat with this. The folder was open in front of her. She didn't look at it again. She didn't need to. The other 7 businesses, she said, are they still operating? 6 of them are. One, a dry cleaner on Holt Street, closed 18 months ago. The owner took a buyout offer from an intermediary connected to Holt. She didn't know who she was selling to. Reyes paused. She's 73 years old. She ran that business for 31 years. Emma felt something move through her that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but occupied the territory between them. Can she get it back? Reyes looked at her steadily. That's not something the criminal proceeding can deliver, he said carefully. Emma closed the folder, pushed it back across the desk. She was already thinking the same way she thought through a commission, starting from the finished piece and working backward to what it would take to get there. The other 6 businesses, their owners, people who had been targeted because they were standing in the way of something powerful, same way she had been standing in the way, and who had been fighting alone because they didn't know they weren't alone. She thought about what Dominic had said in the conference room about his mother's alteration shop in the North End, about how different things might have been if she had known who to call. I have some ideas, Emma said. Reyes looked at her with an expression that suggested he had already anticipated this. I thought you might. She met with Dominic at 6 that evening in the workshop because she had stopped going to conference rooms for important conversations, and he had, without comment, adjusted accordingly. She told him what Reyes had told her, about the 7 businesses, about the 73-year-old woman in her dry cleaning shop, and 31 years of work bought out from under her by people who were counting on her, not knowing she had options. Dominic listened without interrupting. He had gotten better at this, she thought, over 3 weeks of conversations. Or perhaps he had always been capable of it and had simply not had many people in his life who asked him to listen rather than decide. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The dry cleaner, he said. The property does she still want it back? I don't know. I haven't talked to her yet. Find out. He said it simply, the way he said things when the decision was already made and what remained was only logistics. If she wants it back, we look at what it takes. Emma looked at him. That's not a small thing. No, he agreed. You'd do that. I'd look at what it takes, he said carefully, and then I'd probably do it, yes. She held his gaze. Why? He looked back at her with the expression she had come to think of as his honest face, the one that appeared when he had decided the controlled version wasn't sufficient. Because you're going to do it whether I help or not, he said, and because... He stopped, looked at the work table, looked back at her, because I have more money than I know how to put to use in ways that mean anything, and this means something. Emma Carter stood in her grandfather's workshop in the evening light and looked at this man who had arrived in her life through the most violent and accidental of entrances and who had spent 3 weeks quietly reorganizing the world around her without once asking her to be grateful for it, or smaller because of it, or different than she was. I need to tell you something, she said. He waited. I almost didn't go to that meeting. She said it plainly, the way she had learned to say difficult things without softening the edges, because the edges were part of the truth. The morning Ryan hurt me, I sat in my car for 20 minutes telling myself to go home, to reschedule, to take care of the injury and come back when I was ready. She paused. I almost convinced myself. What changed, he asked. My grandfather's voice, she said. Not literally, but I grew up watching him show up. For everything. Even when he was tired or sick or when the business was struggling. He showed up because he believed that showing up was the foundation of everything else. That you could improvise everything after that, but you had to show up first. She looked at Dominic. So I showed up, 45 minutes late and limping and completely unprepared for... She gestured. A small motion that encompassed the workshop in the last 3 weeks and everything that had happened in between. Completely unprepared for me, Dominic said. Completely unprepared for you. The silence that followed was warm. She felt it the way she felt good wood, solid, real, built to last. I need to tell you something too, he said. Emma waited. I have spent 20 years making sure I needed nothing from anyone, he said. It was a deliberate choice. Not a wound, not a limitation, a strategy. I decided that needing things gave other people leverage, and leverage was the only currency in my world that mattered. So I built a life that was entirely self-contained. He paused. It worked. By every metric I applied to it, it worked. He looked at her. And then you walked into my office, apologizing for being late, and in 17 minutes of a business pitch, you made me feel like I was standing on the wrong side of something important. Like the metrics I had been using to measure my life were, he searched for the word, insufficient. Emma looked at him steadily. Insufficient, she repeated. You fight for things because they matter, he said, not because they're valuable, not because losing them would be strategically disadvantageous, because they matter, because your grandfather built them, and because the neighborhood needs them, and because a family in Brookline deserves a table made with that quality of attention. He stopped. I had forgotten that things could matter like that. I'm not sure I ever fully knew it. A pause. You reminded me. Emma crossed the workshop and stood in front of him. She looked up at his face, controlled, careful, honest in this moment in a way that she understood had cost him something real to arrive at. We're both a mess, she said. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Comprehensively, when he agreed. I'm going to negotiate 2 more clauses in that investment agreement. I know. And I'm going to be difficult about the marketing strategy. I anticipated that. And I'm not going to stop pushing on the dry cleaner situation until we have an answer. I would be concerned if you did. She held his gaze. And I'm not going to apologize for any of it. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face completed itself, some internal process arriving at its end, point of calculation finishing, and the result being exactly what he had hoped for. Good, he said quietly. 6 months later, Carter Woodcraft had a 3-month wait list. The investment had restructured the debt in exactly the way Dominic had described, giving the business room to breathe room, to grow room, to take commissions that the old financial pressure would have made impossible. Emma had hired 2 people, a young woodworker from Dorchester who had been looking for a place to learn properly, and a business manager who handled the administration that Emma had been doing badly and reluctantly for 3 years. She had negotiated 4 clauses in the investment agreement, not 2. Dominic had conceded 3 of them and held firm on 1, and she had respected him more for the 1 he held than the 3 he gave. The dry cleaner on Holt Street had her building back. It had taken 2 months and a set of legal maneuvers that Emma did not fully understand and had decided not to ask too many questions about, and it had taken the woman, her name was Dorothy. She was 74 by the time it was finished, approximately 48 hours to reopen. She had called Emma to tell her, and Emma had sat in the back of the workshop and cried with the kind of relief that has nowhere else to go. Ryan Brooks went to trial in the early spring. Emma testified. She sat in the witness chair and answered every question clearly and directly and without apology. And she did not look at Ryan once during the 2 hours she was on the stand, not because she was afraid of him, but because she had decided that the last time she looked at his face would be the morning he had put his hands on her, outside this building, and that image had lost its power. Somewhere along the way, burned through, replaced by everything that had come after it. He was convicted on 4 counts. His sentencing was scheduled for June. She did not feel triumphant when the verdict came through. She felt tired, and then she felt quiet, and then she felt something she could only describe as clean. Like a surface that has been properly sanded, all the damage worked out of it, the grain of the wood visible again, the truth of the material showing through. She called Dominic from the steps of the courthouse. It's done, she said, a pause. How are you? Not how did it go, not what was the verdict. How are you? I'm okay, she said. And then because he deserved the full truth, I'm actually okay, not performing it, actually. I know, he said. I can tell the difference. She laughed. The laugh came easily now. Not the startled, involuntary kind from those early days, but something rooted, something that knew where it lived. I'll be at the workshop in an hour. I'll be there, he said. She stood on the courthouse steps for a moment before going to the car. The city moved around her in its ordinary way, people with places to be the sound of traffic, the particular Boston light that could be ruthless in winter and generous in spring, and was today somewhere generously in between. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about what he would say if he could see the workshop. Now the wait list, the new faces, the sign freshly painted above the door. She thought he would probably say something characteristically understated, the way he always had something like, well, it's coming along with that small smile he kept for moments he was proud of but didn't want to oversell. She thought he would like Dominic, not immediately. He would watch him first the way he watched everything slowly, with the patience of a man who had learned that the truth of a thing reveals itself over time if you're willing to wait for it. He would watch Dominic show up quietly and consistently, and after enough time, he would say something like, he's solid, which in Thomas Carter's vocabulary was the highest compliment available. She thought, I am still here, in the same city, in the same building, doing the same work. And everything around that fact has changed completely. She thought this is what surviving looks like when you stop doing it alone. She walked to the car. She turned the key. The engine started with that slight sound on the left that meant the front suspension still needed attention because she had been busy and kept putting it off, and Dominic kept telling Marcus to mention it, and she kept pretending she hadn't heard. Next week, she thought. She'd take it in next week. She drove back to Ashbury Street with the windows down and the radio on, and the particular feeling of someone who has finally stopped running from the thing chasing them and turned around and discovered that the thing now that she was facing it was not as large as it had seemed in the dark. The sign above the door of Carter Woodcraft caught the afternoon light as she pulled up. Established 1978. Her grandfather's name, her grandfather's craft, her grandfather's stubbornness and patience, and belief that good work built in the right spirit was its own argument against every force that tried to diminish it. She had kept it. She had kept all of it. And nobody, not Ryan Brooks with his hands and his leverage, not Gerald Holt with his tunnel and his network, not 2 years of careful dismantling of her confidence and her worth, had managed to take from her the one thing that had always been most essentially hers, the knowledge that she was exactly enough. Not in spite of everything she had survived, because of the way she had chosen to survive it. She went inside. The work was waiting. She was not late.